Repression continues to escalate in Argentina. Police are shaking Buenos Aires amid ongoing actions against proposed pension reform. Protesters threw rocks and firecrackers at police near the Congress building in the second day of protest over the pension reform proposed by the right-wing government of President Mauricio Macri. Police responded with tear gas and water cannons to suppress the crowds. Thousands more peaceful protesters marched on the Congress to try to disrupt the reform debate, which could have been passed on Monday. The bill has already passed the Senate, leaving the lower house to give final legislative approval, a decision that was suspended last Thursday following outcry and violent demonstrations. The country's main union, or the CGT, is calling for a 24-hour general strike to protest this proposal.
It has been decided that starting at noon today, a cessation of activities begins with a total stoppage of activities from the 0 hours of today's day until tomorrow at noon.
This means going back to the 90s, and worse than the 90s. From that point of view, it's an outrage. That is, what they should be thinking about is how our grandparents can live better, and not for grandparents to be forced to park cars or wash cars in the streets.
After 3 weeks of confusion and outcry, the Electoral Court in Honduras has declared that the current president, Juan Orlando Hernández, won the presidential election. Opposition supporters immediately took to the streets to protest, as they have done almost every day since the poll on November 26, to denounce what they see as fraud. The Electoral Authority insists its recount has confirmed the result, but the opposition say they will not recognize it.
After computing all of the ballots, after resolving all of the challenges, the tribunal has got the final results, and we make this known to the Honduran people in this declaration. For the President of the Republic, we have the results, as you can see reflected on the screen. We have the National Party of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernández Alvarado, with 42.95%.
We absolutely reject the declaration of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal. We do not recognize any action that is committed by this criminal organization for electoral fraud organized by the government of Juan Orlando Hernández.
Earlier we spoke with our correspondent on the situation in Honduras. So we'll see what she had to say about the situation.
The Opposition Alliance had already called for a fresh national strike to happen today, Monday, beginning at 6 o'clock in the morning. And those protests have gone forward. As you mentioned, people were taking to the streets in the hours after the announcement of the results, blocking roadways. There were dozens of blockades in Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula and other parts of the country. So that activity is continuing today. In its initial reaction to the results, the Opposition Alliance rejected the results, called for mobilization, but didn't lay out its next steps in terms of its plan of action. But we can hear kind of informally that the Opposition Alliance is supporting this plan to call for new elections.
Honduras opposition candidate Salvador Nasralla met with the General Secretary of the Organization of American States to denounce the electoral fraud in November 26 election. Nasralla also met with the Department of State and the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in Washington, D.C., where he expressed his concern about the U.S. and its lack of consideration and attention on the leadership of Honduras.
I have the feeling that the United States sees us as a small country, and they have bigger problems outside their territory to resolve. Therefore, the U.S. is not giving enough attention to this matter as we would have liked to understand what is going on. The United States is looking for an allied country despite the country being governed by a dishonest person. Contrary to me, my family and those close to me who have no criminal record.
Our correspondent Francesca Manuel has more details from Washington, D.C. on the situation.
We are outside the building of the Organization of American States in Washington, where Honduras opposition presidential candidate Salvador Nasrallah met with the General Secretary of the organization, Luis Almagro, to denounce the electoral fraud that got current President Juan Orlando Hernández re-elected. The group of Honduras behind me say they are protesting to demand the will of the people regarding this election be respected. They also rejected the announcement made by the Supreme Electoral Tribunal that declared Juan Orlando Hernández as the new president of the country, as well as the repression that the people of Honduras have had to face. Human rights organizations said that at least 14 people were killed on the last 3 weeks since the elections of November 26th. Although the OAS said that they have doubts about the process of this election, demonstrators say that the organization hasn't condemned the decision of the Electoral Tribunal, nor did it denounce the violation of human rights against those defending democracy back in Honduras.
That was Francesca Emanuel from Washington, D.C. After the final result was declared, the Organization of American States called for new elections in Honduras. The head of the OAS observer mission repeated that the poll had been marred by irregularities.
The Electoral Observer Mission considered that it has observed a process of low electoral quality and therefore cannot settle the doubts over what has been announced today. The mission regrets once again the incidents of violence that have occurred in the elections in different phases of the electoral process and calls once again for all actors to stay calm and act responsibly.
Chilean President Michelle Bachelet has had a breakfast meeting with President-elect Sebastián Piñera after his win on the past elections. Bachelet said that the meeting between the two is not considered a formal meeting, but a work meeting instead, so that they could discuss different coordination issues for the future transfer of government on March 11, 2018. Puerto Rico's Governor Ricardo Rossello has ordered a review and recount of every death since Hurricane Irma has hit the island in September. The official death toll stands at 64, but an analysis by the New York Times found out that the count was likely to be over 1,000. It is likely that many deaths were recorded improperly and not tied to damage from Hurricane Maria in official counts, such as life-threatening infections caused by poor living conditions. More news in a minute. Stay with us. The Peruvian President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski has gone on television to apologize to the nation for not explaining his links to the Brazilian construction company Odebrecht. Kuczynski is facing moves to impeach him after it emerged that Odebrecht had paid millions of dollars to companies linked to him. But the president continued to deny that he had favored the company or done anything illegal. He blamed the opposition for exploiting this case.
It is absolutely clear. Here are the contracts, which I have not signed, which are completely legal and that have been taxed. If this was a bribe, how could it have been done in this way? It can't. I think that this is an exaggeration to try to shake the president, the prosecutor, and a number of other very important people in Peru's political life. Why? To get control of the state without having won the presidential election. Of course, there are people who believe they won it, but they didn't. So we need to respect this. This will have a terrible consequence for Peru and for the economy of all Peruvians.
And over 100,000 Peruvians are unemployed because Odebrecht projects are being stalled. According to the Civil Workers Union, that number will double if the Peruvian construction companies that are also accused of corruption are intervened.
There is only enough money for a single quick meal. Alberto has been unemployed for almost a year since the construction project where he was working was intervened, because Odebrecht was the company in charge. Odebrecht was accused of corruption for bribing several Peruvian authorities.
It doesn't matter if businessmen steal. If they are in jail, they will always have money. Meanwhile, us, the people who live out of their salaries and don't have a steady job, how are we going to live? We're trying to survive selling candies or anything we can.
This is the situation for 100,000 workers, and this number could rise to at least 200,000 in the case of a possible intervention by the Peruvian construction companies Graña and Montero. JJ Comet and the ICC-GCA are both accused of bribing former President Toledo to obtain state contracts together with Odebrecht.
Those projects are well handled. They shouldn't be stopped.
We don't have anything. Our children ask us for food. They are starving, and those responsible go to jail. But it is a golden jail.
Christmas is coming, and right now, many construction projects are being stalled. So now, we're just surviving.
Construction workers demand that the government and the legislative authorities take actions to make sure that the resources go first to pay the salaries of the workers, and also to avoid stalling construction work when they sanction the corrupt.
The chain of payments are broken because workers are not getting paid, so the contractors and the material providers don't get paid either. They are all forgotten.
Civil construction leaders also point out that the inability of Kaczynski's government to come up with big projects is also the cause of growing unemployment in the area.
Protesters in Mexico are demanding that President Enrique Peña Nieto vetoes the internal security law approved by Congress on Friday. The demonstrators said that the law will allow further militarization of the country and that this won't bring peace or security to Mexico. Social movements and opposition political parties say they will continue to protest until the law is dropped by Congress.
What other authority has to tell them that passing this law is wrong? The Human Rights High Commissioner of the United Nations already told them, as well as several other institutions. It's very probable that Enrique Peña Nieto won't hear us because he proposed this law, but we are trying to bring awareness that it's unconstitutional. We are also asking the National Commission of Human Rights to take this to the Supreme Court of Justice to review this law.
This law is extremely worrying, and in my opinion, it's not going to change things all that much. This only makes what is already happening official. The Army has been in charge of public security for more than 10 years now. The Army is already in the streets all around Mexico, and they are performing functions that they should not. And this law is legalizing this. We are waiting for President Peña Nieto to confirm the passing of this law to make what has been happening already official.
Right now, the scenario is very negative because this means that they are stretching this process, a strategy to fight organized crimes that hasn't worked at all for the past 10 years. Us and future generations will live in a situation of extreme violence and violation of human rights all around the country. We are doing all we can to stop this law. We are not defeated or have accepted this situation.
Dozens of Guatemalan families are currently living on the borderlands between Mexico and Guatemala after being driven out of their own territories. Months have gone by and they have yet to receive a solution regarding the relocation from the government of Jimmy Morales. Community leaders say their people are facing serious problems.
These people represent dozens of families that were evicted last June from the community known as Laguna Larga, located in Petén, the northernmost department of Guatemala. They had no choice but to settle in the borderland between Guatemala and Mexico. They tell us the living conditions are inhumane.
We are 111 families, over 400 people, between children and adults. Our living condition hasn't changed from when we were first evicted. This is not a life worth living. This is not our land.
Weeks ago, dozens of families took up residence in encampments outside the presidential house in Guatemala's capital in order to demand a swift answer from President Jimmy Morales' government that would allow them to return to Laguna Larga, where their homes, crops, and livestock were left behind.
We are asking to return to our lands, but they haven't given us an answer either way. Nothing. We have been living under these conditions for 7 months, and the president hasn't made any efforts to even make us an offer to let us know whether or not we can return or if we will be relocated.
The government evicted the inhabitants of Laguna Larga, claiming they had settled in a protected natural reserve. Regardless, residents have legal documents from 20 years ago that back their settlement in that land. Legal aides have said there are economic interests behind this forced removal.
Bueno, mire, se dice que hay intereses.
It has been said there is interest in coal mining, in oil drilling, and resource extraction, and there are security issues to it to being close to the Mexican border.
Posiblemente recursos naturales.
Social organizations that have joined the displaced families in their fight confirm that, after investigating the circumstances of the events, they have found at least 9 interested parties stemming from Canadian, English, and French capital, all of them looking to exploit the natural resources in Laguna Larga.
Negotiations to increase the minimum wage in Colombia for 2018 still haven't reached an agreement. What was proposed by the government and businessmen differs greatly from the workers' union's demands. Our correspondent Milton Henao has more.
For the United Workers' Union in Colombia, the working class is losing the negotiation, which is done every year to establish an increase in the minimum salary, without even sitting down at the table. The leader of the working sector says their salary in Colombia is not increasing, but only compensating for the loss of purchasing power this year.
The terms used aren't the right ones. First, there hasn't been an increase in salaries. We are told that they have increased our wages, but no, it is merely a recovery of the purchasing power. But not even that is achieved. So it is false to talk about an increase of salary.
In the face of this situation, many Colombians seek informal work, who are burdened by unemployment. For example, Andres is an artist with university education who prefers to work on the streets instead of putting up with bad salaries paid by the businessmen in the country.
They make the equivalent of 50 minimum salaries, those who created the laws, and then they believe that we, with a minimum wage, can live. And that is impossible. It really is impossible. That's why we choose to stay out. For example, I could get a job where I make 700,000 pesos, 8 hours a day. With that, I can only pay rent, but I can't afford to live.
So the minimum wage is not the only topic on labor issues being discussed these days. Currently, the Congress is debating the possibility of expanding the workforce in public institutions, an initiative that the Centro Democrático and Cambio Radical parties have opposed. For state workers, the expansion is more than necessary.
It is not the same that if you are a teacher, having a teaching class of 20 students, than to have 45. And also this measure, if you move it to any public institution, in any office, is not the same for a person to handle 20 or 30 transactions, which is what happens in almost every state office.
Businessmen have proposed an increase of 5.1%, and that's about 40 cents of a dollar. Meanwhile, the Workers' Union want a 9% increase of about $22.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Members of the Albanian parliament have tried to prevent the ruling party from electing a temporary prosecutor general by setting off colored smoke bombs inside the parliament. The voting went ahead under a mist of pink smoke, with the Socialist Party electing Arta Marcu as the new general prosecutor. Clashes with police erupted outside the parliament as protesters gathered to denounce the voting procedure as unconstitutional. several people have been killed in a train crash in Washington today as an Amtrak passenger train derailed. Another 70 people were taken to the hospital after the train came off of its tracks while on a bridge and crashed into the major highway below. The train was on its very first trip along a new route between the cities of Tacoma and Olympia. Now for some of the other stories that are making headlines around the world.
Austria's new coalition government formed between the far-right Freedom Party and the Conservative People's Party has been sworn in Vienna. Austria becomes the only Western European country with a far-right party in government after a deal was struck on Friday. Ahead of swearing in of the new government, more than 2,000 demonstrators took to the streets in Vienna in protest. The right-wing Freedom Party has pledged to stop illegal immigration, cut taxes, and resist EU centralization.
I demonstrate against social care cuts, against xenophobia, and against the government in general.
I believe Austria should remain open. Clearly, we're a small country and can't take everyone in, but we should also avoid producing general suspects and generally be hostile to migration and refugees. Yes, those are just some of the topics. Things like 12-hour workday. I also find the non-smoking law scrapping terrible.
The head of the United Nations Watchdog for Human Rights says there is a high possibility that the Myanmar civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi and the head of the Armed Forces General Ang Min Leng could be charged with genocide sometime in the future for the violence committed against Rohingyas. A suicide bomb and gun attack on a church in the western Pakistani city of Quetta has killed at least 9 people and wounded dozens of others. The attack targeted Bethlehem Memorial Methodist Church as worshippers gathered inside to attend a Sunday midday service. A suicide bomber detonated his explosives at the gate of the church.
As a result of this act of terror, about 9 of our men, women and children were martyred and nearly 50 were wounded. Today marks the Black Day of Quetta's history. We, on behalf of the entire Christian community, strongly condemn this act of terrorism. We pray for the families whose members were either martyred or injured in this incident.
A power outage at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport has stranded tens of thousands of passengers and left them in darkened terminals. Around 1,000 flights were cancelled. The airport is the world's busiest, handling more than 250,000 passengers. After 11 hours, the electricity was restored, but the passenger logjam continues at the airport.
We get to the airport and we arrive to darkness and a million people, and we're like, oh no, not again. But it's not Delta's fault, you know.
French sailor François Gaba has set a new record for the fastest solo round-the-world navigation, smashing the previous record by 6 days and 10 hours. He completed the journey non-stop, confined to his trimaran sailing yacht since 4th November.
South Africa's ruling African National Congress, the ANC, has elected Cyril Ramaphosa to succeed President Jacob Zuma as the party's leader. Mr. Ramaphosa is in a strong position to become president in the 2019 elections. In his campaign, the 68-year-old deputy president spoke out strongly against state corruption and has the backing of the business community. In the Gaza Strip, a funeral has been held for Ibrahim Abu Thoraya, a protester killed by the Israeli forces during demonstrations against the U.S. decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Our correspondent Nur Harasin has more in this report.
Thousands of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip on Sunday attended the funeral of a disabled Palestinian activist who was killed by Israeli forces over the weekend during protests against the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital.
He challenged his disability. He had no legs. However, he participated in the protest to defend Jerusalem. Like all youth, he got angry when he heard on TV that Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, not Israel. And he shouted out, "We are going to Jerusalem martyrs in the millions."
Ibrahim Abu Thoraya, 29, was shot in the head and died with a Palestinian flag in his hand on Friday. In 2008, he lost both of his legs in an attack during the Israeli aggression on Gaza. However, his disability did not stop him from participating in the demonstrations against Israel. A presidential decree issued after his death described him as a martyr of the Palestinian Revolution. Abu Thuraya was one of 4 Palestinians killed in clashes with Israeli troops in Gaza and the West Bank last week. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, 8 Palestinians were killed and about 540 were injured in clashes with the Israeli army in Gaza only, since Washington's controversial announcement on Jerusalem. Nur Harazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
Venezuela has maintained strong diplomatic and economic ties with Palestine since the Bolivarian Revolution began in 1999. As part of this long-serving relationship, both Palestinian and Venezuelans have benefited. A correspondent in Caracas, Freddie Gillingham, went along to a medical center to see a Palestinian doctor and find out how he has adjusted to his new home.
Downtown in the La Pastora neighborhood of Caracas, a mother and her child received treatment from a doctor who has traveled a long way to get here. Hassan Mahdi is a Palestinian. He received his medical training at the Latin American School of Caracas, free of charge.
In Palestine,
it is very difficult to study. First, you have to pay, and it's very expensive. And there are not so many opportunities because Palestine is under the occupation. There are no opportunities for studying or even to work.
Hassim now treats patients daily and is fully qualified to do so. And in current times, his service is urgently needed. With an economic blockade affecting Venezuela's ability to import medicines, more and more people are in need of having direct correspondence with their doctor, making Hassim's expertise all the more valuable.
We see many patients every day and many people in need. We're trying to help them. We know that it is not easy because of the current situation in Venezuela, but we are trying to be part of the help and to be together with these wonderful people who always helped us.
Hassim is one of many Palestinians who has sought opportunity in Venezuela. A burgeoning diaspora community has grown over time. Have made best use of Venezuela.
Here I have had the opportunity to do postgraduate study, to specialize, helping my own country and also Venezuela as my second country.
New obstacles put in place by foreign powers have meant Palestinians' voices now more than ever need to be heard. Their recognition of statehood now rests on these young shoulders, who will continue the fight. Venezuela offers new hopes for these young men and women, and as foreign aggression towards both these countries increases, their relationships will only grow stronger. Freddie Gillingham, Telesur, Caracas.
And we've come to the end of this evening news brief. This and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
Community